Hello viewer, we're back with another Kerbal Space Program video. This one is going to show you how to do a trip to the moon. That's a trip to the moon, not a landing on the moon. We're not even going to do an orbit. We're simply going to do a flyby and then come back to Kerbin. We'll do a little bit of science while we're there so it's not a wasted trip, but mainly this is about showing you how to actually get there. Now this rocket is the same as the one that was used to get to orbit last time. The only change that I've made is I've added a couple of mystery goo containers to do some experimentation when we get to the moon's area of influence. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the SAS to on. We're going to make a slight change to the staging stack, which I probably should have done last time. And that's to kick the boosters loose first before firing the engine. The reason for doing that is because if you fire the engine and the boosters get just below it and explode, they could take out the rocket itself. So we'd prefer for that not to happen. The only other changes that we've done to the game is we've unlocked the next stage of the tracking station, which gives us access to patch Koenigs and is also going to show us the apogee and perigee of our rocket to get into orbit a little bit easier. So without any further delay, let's fire this thing and let's find out what happens. We'll turn off the messages. We're going to immediately lean just a little bit downrange to the east. Generally speaking, you'll want to do about 10 degrees of lean to every 10 kilometers of height. Now we're getting into the supersonic range here. So when I kick those boosters loose, the rocket should leave them behind because they're going to have a lot more drag. And that engine did set them off, so it was actually a good idea that I did that. Now you don't want to angle down too far, because if you do that while you're still fairly deep in the atmosphere, you'll run into an issue where you'll actually end up going sideways and bad things happen. AP is just coming up on 70 kilometers. That's apoapsis. And we're going to throttle way down at this point, and we're going to start leaning way over. Now normally if you're doing a low orbit, you want to go down to about 70 to 80 kilometers. In this case it doesn't particularly matter because we're going all the way to the moon. But I've backed off on the throttle so that we're not going to use up as much fuel on the way up. But I also don't want to start losing too much velocity. Apoapsis is about just under 90 kilometers. And that's basically the high point of your orbit. There's also your periapsis, which is the low point of your orbit. Now at this point it's not going to get too much higher, even if I increase the throttle. So I'm going to do that because I don't want to start dropping back down before I've achieved orbit. And I can actually nose slightly towards the ground to prevent that from getting too high. Okay, so that puts me into an orbit, and when this PE marker came around, that meant that was at the low spot of the orbit. The high spot at 109 kilometers. So we're now in a stable orbit. We've got a ton of fuel left over, 2,000 meters, almost 2,100 meters of delta V. It takes about 825 to get to the moon. Now the trick for this is to learn where to do your maneuver node. And you want to do it, you want to line up the edge of the planet with the moon, and then you just want to pull out some prograde until you get an intercept. And we'll move that up a little bit to get it a little bit closer to the moon. Okay, now you can see that our trajectory is going to be deflected past the moon a little bit, and it's going to be fairly hard to adjust here. So what I want to do is I want to point towards that node, and we're coming up on it fairly soon, in 1 minute, and it's going to take 47 seconds of burn time. So we're going to split this in half, and we're going to start our burn at about 22 seconds. We are going to make a correction on the way, but it'll be a little bit simpler to do if we do it a little further out there. This will put us to about 123 kilometers on the periapsis at the moon. And that's also pushed our time out a little bit more. So at 20 seconds, we want to go to start this burn. And we want to be facing this blue indicator, which is our node marker. And it's going to use 970 meters. I said it would be about 800, but I'm not quite as efficient as I need to be. And there we go, we're at 20 seconds. And now we want to burn this all the way down so that this blue line matches our projected course. And you don't have to worry too much if you don't get it exactly, completely 100% correct, because with very little amounts of fuel you can do course corrections that will fix it for you. We'll start the throttle down a little bit here. And that puts it pretty close. It's not exactly correct, but it's close enough for this. And at that point, we're done with this maneuver node. And we can see that we're going to get to within 200 kilometers of the moon. We can burn a little more and it'll pull us a little bit tighter. Okay, that'll put us about 30 kilometers off the moon's surface. Now, we've got so much speed going on here that we're actually going to leave the solar system. And we do not want to do that, so what we're going to do is we're going to drop some of this speed once we get into the moon's sphere of influence. Now, if I'd have spent more time setting this up, I could have hopefully done a free return course where it would have looped just around this with lower velocity and ended up coming back to Kerbin in a figure 8 configuration. But this is good enough for the first trip out there. We've still got a ton of delta V, 1,000 meters a second, so that'll be enough to get us back. And we'll accelerate time out. And when we switch into the moon's sphere of influence, it'll automatically drop our time acceleration a little bit. Okay, so here we are. We're going to do 30 kilometers from the moon. We could go in an orbit by adding a maneuver and burning retrograde. But we do not want to do that. We want to edit this, and we want to go just a little bit more. We want to go into full-on orbit. Whoops. Nope, that's prograde. There we go. Okay, so that's going to kick us back towards Kerbin. But we're not going to be getting quite as close to the planet as would be preferred. So we're going to drop that down just a little bit. And we're going to watch where the periapsis on Kerbin ends up. Now these different colors are different orbit numbers. So the purple one will be the next one, and then the following one will be the red one. And I don't want to get into the point where I'm going to complicate that quite so much. So I'm going to try to have just a single color on that. And then I can also try pulling with the radial in or radial out. And maybe I can get that a little bit closer. I don't necessarily have to. Nope, that's not helping me. So we'll just go with the simple maneuver. Now I'm in the moon's sphere of influence, so I can do a couple of things here. We got plenty of time until we get there. It's going to be another 32 minutes of real time until we get to that maneuver node. And you can line up your maneuver nodes in advance. Those will never change orientation. So if I stay like this, I may not actually be looking at the moon when I go back out. There it is. I'm basically pointed to slow down. I've got to lose 600 meters a second to get me back onto an orbit of Kerbin again. And that will still be a high orbit, but as soon as I leave the moon's sphere of influence, I can then burn retrograde and I can drop it down to the point where I can do a re-entry. So while I'm here and I've got some time to kill, I can now do a temperature pressure log. Barometric pressure first. And the temperature. And I can do mystery goo. And I can also go EVA, and I can do an EVA report. And you see how the ship is now twisting a little bit. It's no longer got the SAS on, or no longer has a pilot in command. So the SAS is going to turn off as soon as I get back into the craft. And you want to be really careful about letting go of the craft at this point, because with it spinning like that, it can be hard to get back onto. And unfortunately, your EVA pack is extremely overpowered. There is a mod for that will underpower it a little bit and make it a lot easier to get around, but I don't have that installed. So we're going to take the data from that, and we're going to take the data from that, and I don't think I have an alternative to letting go, because I also want to pull the data from this, because these are not going to survive the trip back to Kerbin. So hopefully this doesn't go terribly wrong. I'm going to let go of the craft. I'm going to use R for RCS to activate my jetpack. And this takes an extremely light touch. And it's always in reference to the camera. So as soon as I make a movement, he'll turn to face the camera. And there is nothing that stops your drifting. That's all manual. And this is WASD and control and shift for up and down. Okay, so I've got the data out of that. Now the next thing I have to do is to get myself back onto the ladder. And if I'd have been smart, I would have used the device on this side of the craft. Or if I was smarter, I would have put them closer so that I could reach them without getting off the ladder. And grab on. Whew. Okay, that was risky as hell. But we made it. We got our data. Now we're going back inside. SAS is off, so we'll turn that back on. We'll go facing our maneuver node. And should do a crew report as well. And high above the moon, I believe, is more than 50 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll keep that. I don't have the option of transmitting any of this stuff. EVA report. Okay, so that's good. I'll just keep all of these. And at this point, I'm still 25 minutes away, so I can accelerate time. And once again, it's a 22-second burn, so I want to start the burn 10 seconds in advance. And be careful about using time acceleration. It's better to sit here bored, gawking at the scenery, than it is to miss your burn window. I'm going to check the map and make sure that we're still 30 kilometers. Periapsis 33, so I should be able to get another crew report, but I don't think it's safe to go outside for an EVA report, because I don't have a lot of time to waste on this. But this won't be the last trip to the moon. Okay, now I want to go out of acceleration. Can we do a temperature log? Yes, more data, because I'm not high above the moon anymore. Now I'm just above the moon. Log pressure. Crew report. Yes, I'm going to overwrite this because this one will be worth more. Um, 30 seconds. I don't really have enough time in 20 seconds to leave the ship. So we're just going to get lined up for this. And we're going to get set to do our burn. We're going to burn about a little over 50% of our fuel. Oh, and I started a little late. Okay, and you see how the maneuver node starts to move when you start getting pretty close? Now we'll check the map. Is that close enough? Yes it is. That should be close enough, because this is where it's going to put us once we leave the sphere of influence, And if I take it up a little bit more, actually I don't need the maneuver node. We'll consider this burn to be complete. So our next change is going to be to set, or our next burn is going to be to set the PE. We've got 500 meters per second of delta V. That'll be more than enough. So we're going to accelerate time. Now, even though it looks like we're going in a completely different direction, this is the actual trajectory that we're on. It just means that we haven't left the moon's sphere of influence yet. So as soon as we get to the end of this blue line and the escape node, then we're going to be back into the into Kerbin's sphere of influence. It only calculates one gravitational body at a time. Okay, so we're back on Kerbin's sphere of influence, and we want to turn to retrograde. And we're going to be 1,374 kilometers above the surface. So we're going to wait until we get up to AP before we do anything, because that will be where the biggest change is going to happen for the smallest amount of fuel. Oh, we're past AP. We're going this way. I thought originally we were going the other way, but okay, fair enough. So we can't do anything while we're in time acceleration. So as we burn, we can see that this is going down. And we want to get this to about 45 kilometers. And the reason for that is because at 45 kilometers, you'll be deep enough into the atmosphere that it'll create enough drag to actually slow you down to do a, like to break this orbit, to drop the AP down to worst case scenario. You'd have to orbit back out multiple times if we run out of fuel. We're still doing pretty good for delta V. Even though it looks like we're getting low on fuel, the actual quantity of it, what we have is enough to slow us down to basically a relative stop, because we're only moving at 260 meters a second. Now we're down to 300 kilometers. Now what I'll often do is I'll actually turn down the thruster on the engine here, and with the thrust limiter on to, let's say, 20%, that means that when I go full throttle, I'll only burn 1/5 as much. But that gives me much more precision when I'm trying to get an exact course than I could otherwise get through the through the engine. Like, it takes that much more to move me, so I can do small amounts of thrust easier. Okay, that would have me just starting to dip into the atmosphere. Now, this white line that you're beginning to see is a mod called, trajectory analysis? Trajectories, that's what it is. And what that does is it calculates your trajectory based on atmospheric drag. So if I was to just leave it at this, I would go through the atmosphere, it would cut my AP down to this point, and then the next time through the atmosphere it would cut it down a little bit lower. So this basically just gives me an estimate of what it's going to do. Now this is calculating on the mass of the ship as it sits right now, not the mass once I jettison the engine. And now it's showing that I'm going to going to do a landing point here, and I think that's the second orbit, this red line that it's showing. So I'm going to burn a little bit more down. And you can see that these small movements are making a huge change onto my orbit. So I'm going to cut my thrust limiter down even more. We'll go down to about 5% now. Oh, I'm sorry. The red line is actually where you're in the atmosphere. That's a marker of where you're actually in the atmosphere that it's calculating out. And then the white line is your trajectory after you come back out of the atmosphere. Okay, so we've still got 374 meters of delta V. I know that it's going to go a little bit lower than that. So this is going to drop me probably on the backside of the planet. So at this point, I can start to time accelerate. And I've used all the thrust that I need to use on that engine. Now I could set myself up to do another orbit if I wanted to, but this is going to be just straight into the atmosphere. As soon as I start getting close, I'm going to turn retrograde, and then I'm going to dump the booster. Actually, no, that's not exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn this way and dump the booster so that it gets away from the craft. So we're going to trigger the next stage now. Even though I still have a little bit of fuel, I don't require that fuel anymore. Is there anything I can do with this? Observe mystery clue. Oh, okay, space high over Kerbin. So if I can retrieve that, which is going to be tricky, but I'm going to attempt it. So we're going to EVA. 400 kilometers. Okay, it's a good thing I did this now. Spaceport to release. RCS for the jetpack. Collect data. Okay. And we've got our data. Whoops. Board the craft, you fool. Okay, so that cost us about 100 kilometers. Now I want to point myself to probably one of the radials. So it kicks it away from the craft, jettison the engine, point to retrograde. And that's it. I am ready for re-entry. We've been around the moon, we've come back. All we need to do at this point is to survive re-entry. So we're still 280 kilometers. We'll just fast forward time a little bit. Back to normal time. Make sure we're pointed retrograde. And we're just starting to hit the atmosphere. And it looks like this is going to be our projected splashdown, because it's calculating the atmospheric drag. Alright, we're getting a little bit of heating. Hopefully that's going to be alright. It does have a built-in heat shield, but it's not really designed for coming back from the moon. And it didn't even occur to me to put a full-size heat shield on this thing. Oh, it's showing the AP and PE on that. I didn't have to go to the map screen after all. Okay, so that camera shift means that it's gone suborbital now. Periapsis is below the surface of the planet. I burned off the thermometer and the pressure, barometric pressure thing. We're starting to lose temperature. I've taken SAS off so it can settle into its own position here. And things are starting to calm down a little bit. Ah, maneuver mode. That's what switches those. Interesting. I don't think that was in there when I was last playing this game much. So we're still too fast for the parachute, but we're going down at a fairly shallow angle, which means we're going through a lot of lower atmosphere rather than just going vertically through it, which would have you dropping through these various stages of atmosphere until you hit the thickest one down at the bottom here. So that's a good thing because you'll lose a lot more speed. Now we're at the point where we can use the parachute if need be. And we're starting to come in more vertically. As you can see, this is getting closer and closer to the vertical portion of the nav ball. And I could fire the chute at any point now. I believe I put the full deployment at about 750. That should give us plenty of time to slow down before we get to the water. Wouldn't it be terrible if it took too long and I actually smashed into the ocean at high speed and destroyed the capsule and lost everything I did that entire trip for? Wouldn't be the first time it had happened, though. And at this point, it's a nice leisurely trip. You can kind of unclench the butt cheeks. If you got a bottle of alcoholic beverages sitting next to you, this is a good opportunity to have a swig. Maybe you've got a coffee that you've been waiting to take a sip of. And finally, you splash down in the ocean after your trip to the moon. Now, we've already done crew reports and various other things like that in the ocean, so the only thing left to do is recover the vessel. We should gain a bunch of science for the 2 mystery goo packages and the readings that we took off of the thermometer and the pressure indicator. We got 118 science. That's going to allow us to open up a lot of the tech tree. And we didn't get much funds from the recovered parts, but we did get probably funds for a milestone, like a world's first type thing. And he gained some XP because he did his orbit of the moon. Or orbit. He did his trip to the moon, his flyby. Okay, so we now have $500,000. We can upgrade more of our facilities. If you upgrade the assembly building, you can build bigger rockets. If you upgrade the launch pad, you can do heavier rockets and bigger rockets, more parts. Maybe you want to start playing around with space trips with planes at this point. That will allow you to unlock a lot of additional features. There should be more missions available. But that seems like a pretty good place to leave it for this video. We've accomplished quite a bit. We've gained a bunch of science. And at this point, we can decide what we want to do next. I may do a video on actually landing on one of the moons. But surprisingly enough, it won't be the one we just did our flyby. It will actually be Minmus, the one that's a little further out. It takes only slightly more fuel to get there. But it's far easier to land, and you can do a lot more different biomes while you're there, and each of them is worth more science than the inner moon is. So it's well worth the trip there, even though it's slightly more effort. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope this video was informative, and if it was, join me for the next one. Bye-bye.